begin with the latest in trade talks between China and the US. China says a tariff pause has been extended. Ken Brown reports from Stockholm, where the talks have been taking place.
Well, talks have concluded here in Stockholm between China and the United States, with another extension agreed in principle to conduct further negotiations. The delegation spoke from around 12 p.m. to 6 p.m. at the Swedish Prime Minister's residence right here behind me, and then they both held press conferences. No major breakthroughs were announced, no done deals of the likes that we've already seen with Great Britain, Japan, and most recently the European Union.
More insight. Let's bring in Thomas Gross. He's a professor in the George Washington University Graduate Business School. Great to have you on the program today. Now, we don't know a lot about this extension, but it's an extension nonetheless. Is this a win for China or the US?
Yeah, hi, Sally. Nice to see you again. That's a good question. I think it's probably a win for both parties, and I think it tells us what's happening in these closed discussions, and it tells us that things are actually progressing pretty well. The reports are that both parties are taking these discussions seriously. They understand the economic significance, not just to their own country, but to the interrelationship with the United States and other countries. So it's a very positive sign, I think, for both parties. But I think I would make the point, if I understand correctly, the Treasury Secretary said that there was a pause in principle, but I think he deferred to President Trump to make the final decision on that, because I think he knows who his boss is on these matters. So it's a sign that, if you compare, just a little comparison, that in the case of the U.S. demands on Russia to pause the attacks on Ukraine, Trump felt very frustrated, and he shortened the time to 10 or 12 days. The fact that he is allowing this pause, or it looks like he's going to allow this pause, means that things are progressing pretty well.
These talks follow Trump's trade deal with the EU, but it's not been without frustration. France denounced it as a submission, and Germany warned of economic damage to come. But unlike the EU, China doesn't rely on the US for security and has some leverage with its grip on the rare earths and magnet market. Can China afford to let these talks play out a little bit and squeeze the US in the process?
Well, I think the question is whether both parties can afford to pause. And China has an interest in coming to terms on this. And if you recall how we got to this point, actually, it may be worth just a second to think about this. It was President Nixon back in 1972 who opened up China to the US market when he met with Mao Zedong. And subsequently, China became a member of the World Trade Organization, WTO, and it was required in that admission to comply with a number of standards to bring its entire system up to international standards. And there have been complaints, a lot of complaints, that China has not complied completely with that. So undue licensing requirements and intellectual property issues and things like that. So although we're talking about tariffs, I think it's important to understand there are also non-tariff issues, and that's what makes these talks so complicated. They have to deal with more than just a tariff issue.
Right. And of course, among broader economic issues, Washington complains that China is flooding world markets with cheap goods, while Beijing says the US national security export controls on tech goods seek to stunt Chinese growth. Is there a middle ground here, do you think?
They're going to have to work this out. I mean, it's complicated because there are economic issues, there are national security issues. The United States is essentially in a Cold War with China for development of artificial intelligence. You can be certain that just as the Biden administration was restricting shipment of chip technology and software technology involving AI, for example, Biden had that policy. Trump is continuing that policy. So the complexity of the issues are so much more than what we've seen in the other talks. So compared to European Union, for example, it's just not a cookie cutter situation where you could take what was agreed to in EU and apply it to China. China's a totally different situation.
And China has advocated for stable and predictable trade rules. Do you think these talks are helping to restore certainty to the bilateral trade environment between China and the US, or is it too early to tell?
Well, I think both parties recognize that there is an interdependence between these two countries that cannot be pulled apart. And it goes to this basic economic international trade concept of comparative advantage. David Ricardo in the 1800s says it's actually in the interest of all countries to engage in international trade because they're better off. Everybody gets better goods and services because we pick and choose the better services from those countries. So in this case, you know, it's so intertwined, it's difficult to imagine pulling this apart, even if you want to promote an isolationist policy, which has been Trump's agenda since his first term, actually. He imposed very tough tariffs on China in his first term, and many of those still are in effect and will be continued. So even with an isolationist policy, it's very difficult for either country to really pull things apart.
Right. There are murmurs that both leaders will meet later this year. Do you think a face-to-face meeting could move things along?
It definitely would be a positive move, and I think the fact the talks are going well, a face-to-face meeting can really move things along very well, and I think Trump likes that approach. I think he likes President Xi, and yeah, I think it's definitely a possibility if things stay on the positive side.
All right, we'll leave it there. Really appreciate your time. Thomas Gross for us.
All right, thanks for having me.